Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Journey to VBAC podcast. My name is Petra Cruz. I had a vaginal birth after three cesareans, and I am the creator of the Journey to VBAC membership. Now, let's get into this episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. I have Vanda, who is a functional medicine nurse that works to help postpartum mamas combat fatigue so they can fully embrace each moment of motherhood with energy and joy. I love that. As a mom of four kids herself, Vanda understands the unique challenges mamas face. Vanda's clients say that she is easy to talk to, always has helpful advice that's easy for busy moms, which is so important because we're all so busy, to implement and is readily available when needed. She's helped dozens of women start showing up for themselves again to prioritize their health and wellness so that they can truly feel their best. And I feel like this is so important, just like for any and all of us, because we just get so caught up in the weeds of things that we forget to prioritize ourselves. So, how did you get started in this specific area of postpartum?
So I think for many of us that come into spaces like this, it's through our own journeys and our own stories. I will give the abbreviated version of mine. So I very first came into the world of functional medicine when I transitioned off birth control, lost my period for 9+ months, tried to go the conventional medicine route to get that resolved. It was really freaking me out. And I just kept being met with, we should probably just go back on birth control. You're not ready to have a baby yet. I wasn't married at the time. So they just like weren't concerned. And I was already a nurse. I am an RN, have been for almost 11 years now. And I knew enough to just be like, that answer did not sit right with me. And I was like, okay, thank you, but no, thank you. And I started to investigate things on my own. And at that time, I don't feel like there were as many women and providers now working online. This was back in like 2018, 2019. So I really found a lot of blogs and the start of some podcasts that were talking about functional medicine. And it was just like this huge eye opener that we don't have to treat everything with like a medication. Um, that you can really dig into your own body and what your body is trying to tell you and address things from that approach, which is more of a root cause approach, which is what functional medicine is all about. So, through some of the things that I basically taught myself, I was able to make some diet and lifestyle changes, and eventually I did get my period back. So, then fast forward to when I have my first biological child. I was in my postpartum period and I got to the point that I was about 3 to 4 months postpartum and I just did not feel as well as I thought that I should and didn't feel as good as I wanted to. And I definitely wasn't in a place of like postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression, but I was just like, I have waited for this time in my life for so long, for literally my whole life. I wanted to be a mom. And I just couldn't enjoy it as much as I knew that I quote should be or that I always envisioned myself. And so I came kind of back to investigating things on my own. What changes can I make to what I'm doing right now to help me to feel better? And it was through that I got reintroduced to functional medicine again, started making some diet and lifestyle changes, and was like, you know what? I really want to learn way more about this. And as a nurse, there are courses that you can take to be further trained specifically in functional medicine. And I started doing that. And from that, I started learning about functional testing, came across HTMA testing, which is like what I use most often with my clients now. And my mind was just kind of blown. And I was like, I have to take this information and give it to more moms that are in the same situation that I was in. And as I've had like more babies and more postpartum periods and more periods of breastfeeding, it's kind of a cycle that I continue to go through. And thankfully, it gets easier every time. But I just felt like I needed to share the information on a wider spectrum.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. And I feel like there's so many expectations that we come with to like how our birth is going to be or how our postpartum is going to be. And sometimes it's just like completely blown out of the water, like not even close. But listening, it sounds like to your inner voice or your intuition telling you like something may not be right. So, what did those tests actually show you when you took them?
So, an HTMA test is a hair tissue mineral analysis for those that might not know or might not be familiar. And what that's looking at is your mineral levels and then also heavy metal levels. So, actually, when you're pregnant, you lose around 10% of your minerals. Then, if you also breastfeed, you continue to lose minerals because you're giving those to baby. And then on top of that, if you were on birth control prior to getting pregnant, birth control is also a big depleter of minerals. So when I took my first HTMA test, I kind of expected for it to come back and show that I was depleted in some areas. But I thought, well, I've taken a prenatal. Before that, I was kind of taking some multivitamins. I've always been not perfect by any means because I don't expect perfection for myself or my clients, but I've been a health conscious person. And I thought it won't be too bad. And I was wrong. It was very much showed that I was super depleted. And it was so interesting because there's over like 37 data points that it checks on an HTMA test. And so it's very interesting to see which minerals you're actually still like in the okay range with, but then some others might be totally bottomed out. And like one of the big things that I saw on my first test and is common for other moms that I've done testing with was some adrenal fatigue or adrenal burnout, whatever term you can use those kind of interchangeably. It was very prominent and obvious on my first initial test.
And so like what do you do with these results? Do you have to like try to figure it out on your own and start throwing these minerals at yourself, or is it better to kind of go over it with like a practitioner who actually is aware of this? Because, before I did like any of my training, I had never even heard of like these different kinds of tests. Like I don't remember any of my doctors saying anything about this type of test.
Yeah, and unfortunately, most conventional doctors don't know a lot about HTMA testing or other functional mess that are other functional tests that are out there either, like Dutch testing or GI map or some of the more common ones. So sometimes if you mention these to, your traditional OBGYN, they kind of brush it off and they're like, oh, that doesn't mean anything. It's kind of, quackery, whatever. But HTMA testing specifically has been studied for like hundreds of years. And you definitely do want to get it ordered and review it with someone that has been trained on it because you can't look at the data in a black and white lens. Like, for example, magnesium is one of the minerals that gets checked. And when you get your report back, it's common for magnesium to look high. Well, if you had not been trained on the test and didn't know what that meant, you would look at that and think, oh, my magnesium level is high. I don't need magnesium. And you might either stop taking it if you were supplementing with it or choose to not add that into your supplement rotation. But actually, when you see a high magnesium level on a hair test, it actually means that your body needs more of it because what's happening is magnesium is used in like our stress response and for a bazillion other processes in our body. So we're burning through it really quickly. And one of the big differences in like traditional blood work versus HTMA testing is that when we have an HTMA test, we are actually looking at what's going on inside the cell, whereas blood work looks outside the cell. So it
Hmm.
does take a trained person to be able to look at the whole test and then also take you as an individual into consideration for like, what are your symptoms? How do you feel? What are you most concerned about? And then use that information to make you a really customized care plan or action plan based on what your unique needs are.
I love that. And so when is the best time to take these tests? I know you said, you can take it in pregnancy or postpartum, but when do you feel like it would be most beneficial, or is it just beneficial to take it all the time?
It's kind of beneficial at any time, but I do think in terms of like thinking pregnancy and postpartum, there are some better times to test. So if you are someone that knows, like, I want to conceive within the next year-ish, it's a good time to get a test so that you can build up your nutrient stores that you might be depleted in ahead of your pregnancy. Plus, that also gives the opportunity to kind of optimize some things for fertility. Then you can test during pregnancy. I have tested myself during pregnancy. The only thing with testing while you're pregnant is that, yes, there are tons of things that you can do, diet and lifestyle, in terms of diet and lifestyle. But when it comes to supplements, supplements get a little tricky in pregnancy because unfortunately, there's not a lot of studies done. We don't always know the safety of everything. And that's kind of to each your own on what you feel comfortable taking during pregnancy. But I never want people to like invest in testing and then it not be as actionable as it could be. So I typically, for pregnant women, recommend like, hey, let's hold off on this and let's wait until you're postpartum when there is a little bit more safety there for supplement specific things because while you're pregnant, we can still work on diet and lifestyle changes, but we kind of know what those things are without the testing. So and I always get the question like, well, what if I'm breastfeeding? And again, you do have to take some things into consideration because things will pass through the breast milk to your baby. So that also is an individual decision, but it's really good and really insightful to help in that immediate postpartum period if you can get a test and see like, oh, hey, my magnesium's depleted, my potassium's depleted, then you can make a more conscious effort to include those things, even if it's just in your diet, to really help support you to heal and also have the energy that you need to care for this, new human, or if you have multiple kids that you're chasing around, to maintain that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I do have a question about that because obviously, like whether you have a vaginal birth or you end up having a cesarean, there could be different, I would say, like minerals that may de be depleted, like depending on even the route of birth. So when is like the most optimal time to take this test so that it's not, and I don't know if it is or not, but would it be kind of different results, like the time frame that you take it after birth?
There's no real wrong time to take it,
Okay.
but I do think for people that are, we'll say, self-disciplined or self-motivated, and they are someone that's kind of health conscious and maybe like health and wellness is not a new venture for them. They kind of know some of the foundational things to do and take care of yourself. The end of pregnancy, birth itself, and those first few weeks postpartum are very stressful on the body, and they likely are going to deplete you. So coming back to what I said earlier, like we want to capture an HTMA test at the time that it's going to be most actionable for you. So I would say if you can get to that like really like 4 months postpartum, is a good spot because typically you've kind of like gotten into your flow at that point and you are ready also to like kind of take on some new things. Like maybe it's a habit you need to change. Maybe it's like I'm finally ready to like look at what I'm consuming in my diet and make some healthier choices versus for the past 3 months I've just been like feeding myself and making sure that I have food and I didn't really care what it was. So I
Hmm.
think that's a good time frame to look at. But also with HTMA testing, something that you want to consider when choosing when to do your test is that it is a reflective test, meaning that it looks back over the past 3 to 4 months. So if you've been in a time frame when you were like super, super stressed out, you might want to hold off for another month or two where you're more like stable, I guess is kind of the word that I'm looking for, to get like a accurate picture of what your normal is, as opposed to no, like I had this super stressful 3 months where I had so many like life things and maybe job related things coming at me, and that's not my normal. We don't want to make a plan necessarily or like recommend a bunch of lifestyle changes or diet changes based on just one super stressful period of time. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely it does. And so that like got me thinking about, so how often should people take this test since it's this reflective type of testing? It's not as like immediate. Like in my mind, I was thinking like, okay, this must be like the current right now what it is at this very moment that I'm taking this test. So how often do you suggest that they take it after
Yeah.
the
That
initial?
is such a good question. So, for my clients, I recommend getting the initial test. Let's repeat it in about 6 months to check in, see where you're at. We can make adjustments to your plan. And then past that point, most people, if they want to just check in, can do it like once a year. Now, there's, exceptions to that. And some people just really like to have the data. Some people are really data driven. But I typically don't recommend anyone to test sooner than 6 months because you want to, like with the plan that I create for my clients, there it's typically for 12 weeks. That's about 3 months. You want to give yourself time to get all the way through that plan and then also like be stable for a little bit where you're not really changing anything and you're just in this time period of really replenishing your body before you test again to make further changes.
Okay, yeah, that's great suggestions. And so is there like a typical mineral or minerals that you noticed are typically depleted in like the postpartum season?
Yes. So sodium and potassium are two of the big ones. They are super important because we actually, and you may remember like way back to high school chemistry class when they probably taught this to us, but we have a sodium and potassium receptor on every single one of our cells. And that is what dictates what comes in and goes outside of the cell. So we want this system to be working really well because we want to be able to get things like hormones and nutrients inside our cell. And then we also want to be able to kick things out of our cell that don't belong there, like heavy metals or toxins. We're exposed to a lot in our environment, even when we're someone that's like conscious of those things. So that system, we have to have sufficient levels of sodium and potassium for that system to work well. So I would say that is like one of the biggest things that I see across the board, like almost all of the tests that I have ran, because we use sodium and potassium again in our stress response. It's used by our adrenals and it leads to that adrenal fatigue and adrenal burnout when they're depleted.
Yeah. And so if somebody is like wondering, well, how would I even know? Or should I just, like, are there certain, I guess, not symptoms, but like things that they could be doing that might signal to them that this is low in their body?
Well, I think, across the board, just a feeling of like sluggishness, tiredness. I don't feel like I have the energy to do all the things that I want to do. You find yourself like at the end of the day just needing to kind of crash on the couch and like tune everybody out. Like almost you almost disassociate a little bit from like what's going on, or you're just in that like freeze state of your nervous system where you're just like doom scrolling on your phone, maybe. Some other symptoms to kind of be mindful of would be things like um, period irregularities, which that's a little tricky postpartum because that's kind of like there can be a lot going on there. But if you're not someone, if you're preparing for pregnancy, I should say, and you have wonky periods, that would be a consideration. Um, if you feel like you have instability in your blood sugar, like you're somebody that gets hangry, or you feel yourself like start to crash and get shaky, that would be a big one. Skin irregularities, like if you've got acne that's suddenly like popping up again, coming out of nowhere, that would be another one. And then I really like to provide women with like some reassurance that you almost can't overdo it with minerals. Um, we our body doesn't make its own minerals. We have to consume them in the diet that we consume and then through supplementation if we choose to. And across the board, just as Americans, we are pretty depleted because of farming and sourcing of our food and the diet that we typically consume, the stress that we're under, the toxins we get exposed to, all those things act as depleters. So it's really uncommon to find someone that doesn't need mineral support. So I always tell people that if you're feeling any kind of way and you're like, I just would like to feel better than I do right now, start with minerals and feel confident that you can start with like a pre-made mineral mix, that you can order online. You can pick them up at some grocery stores and just kind of rest assured that you're not going to cause yourself harm starting to incorporate those things. And then, when you get to a place that you're like, okay, I'm ready to dig into this, then get the testing.
Okay, well, that's good. And so when you do this mineral testing, what do you typically suggest first? Like, are you telling them take all these supplements, or are you more like, okay, let's focus on your diet, and then if you need those extra minerals, then we'll kind of put those towards you? Or how does it work?
Yeah, the way I do this right now, I have a program, it's called Mama's Power Up, and it's 4 weeks where we really first work together on making sure that you understand the foundation. So we do have conversations about diet and nutrition, and are we putting meals together that support blood sugar balance? We're talking about movement, stress management. I hate to tell people like, oh, just stress less. Like, I don't think that's helpful advice at all. I want to give you tools to be able to better manage your stress because we just live in a time where we can't avoid it.
Hmm.
We also talk about understanding your cycle as a woman a little bit and what changes and like specific to energy, what's normal for you to feel. So we just kind of get that like foundational baseline first because when you sign up to work with me in the program, I'm going to go ahead and send you out your test kit, but then you've got to get your sample. It's got to go out to the lab. They have to process it. I have to get it. I have to look at it, and then I have to make your plan. So that can take, 2 to 3 weeks.
Hmm.
So we work on what we can do right now first, the diet and lifestyle pieces. Then when we get the test back, we further refine that to be customized to what the individual needs. So it may be some additional lifestyle or diet tweaks, but then also going ahead and looking at those supplements to see which ones you specifically need. And I do try to be mindful. I think it's important for us to remember that supplements are meant to be supplemental. They're not meant to be like a magic pill that we take as our end all be all solution.
Hmm.
We've got to do the other work of checking in on our diet, checking in on our lifestyle. Are we moving our body? How are we managing our stress? And then use the supplements to really like close the gaps.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because it feels more like a holistic practice rather than like, let's just throw a pill at it. It's like, no, like the body is a system. Let's treat it as a whole entire system, not just this one part of this system. Because obviously, if one part's broken, the rest of it will not work properly. So I love that. I love that. And I'm just curious, and I didn't ask you this before, but have you personally noticed a difference between women who have had like a traumatic birth or like a non-traumatic birth or a vaginal birth compared to like a cesarean birth? Or have you not like clocked those numbers? If you haven't, that's okay. I know I didn't ask you before.
Yeah, so I haven't noticed a difference between like vaginal birth and C-sections. But for people that do feel like either their birth or their pregnancy was more stressful, I do see that reflected in their test that they are a bit more depleted. And I think it really just does come back down to that stress response and us burning through the minerals when we are under stress.
Yeah, because obviously when we're under stress, we burn more minerals,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I think that's great to understand because I think so many people think, well, I'm just stressing up here in my brain, so it doesn't like affect my body, but it literally is like an energy expenditure. And
Yes.
I think it's important for us to realize that because when you are, because I mean, I've gone through this personally myself too, is when I am more stressed out, I do notice that I feel less excited about like going out for a walk or, going to the gym. And it's because I've already expended so much energy just mentally.
Yep. 100%.
Oh my gosh. Well, I love everything that you're doing. And is there anything else that you wanted to kind of add to this conversation as we kind of wrap up here?
I know that this is like a lot of information, and if you're new to minerals, it can sound like it's really overwhelming. But I always like to give the reminder that this doesn't have to be hard. It can be really easy and really simple. And I do have a resource that can kind of help with that. Maybe we'll talk about that in a second. But, you know, first and foremost, we get our minerals from like fruits and vegetables. So if you have the capacity for nothing else right now, check in with yourself and ask, like, how often am I consuming vegetables and fruit in my diet? And just start there. Start trying to add more, and don't let it be this overwhelming thing because it can be really easy and really simple.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point because I feel like we are sometimes like bombarded with so much information and not necessarily from, this talk about minerals, but just like in our whole life as an entirety. So it's like, okay, I don't even have the capacity to do this extra thing because I have all these other things that I'm juggling already. But I think you make a great point, and it's like just tackle one thing at a time. Just
Mhm.
do one baby step out of this whole process. Just start there and then it won't feel so overwhelming. But thank you so much for all of this information. I think it's going to be incredibly helpful. I wish I had known about this for my postpartum because I feel like it would have helped so much because we just feel so tired, we're so depleted, and a lot of times we just feel so alone that this might help just give us some energy to maybe even have the energy to get out there and not be alone. Go to a mom group, go to the park or something that might help us mentally as well as physically. So, thank you. I just really appreciate all this information. And it sounds like your program is amazing. So, if somebody wants to work with you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so I would love to share a resource with you guys. I have a Minerals for Mamas guide to help you get started. I kind of re-explain some of the things that I've talked about today, but then I also provide lists of like brands for pre-made mineral mixes that I recommend. You can also make some of your own drinks at home that are pretty yummy and they're simple. So I've got some recipes for those in there. And then also a like fridge and pantry kind of staple guide for things that are mineral rich to just keep on hand at all times. So that's super helpful. I'll make sure that you have the link for that. And then if you want to connect with me, I love to hang out on Instagram. You can find me at Wellness with Vanda. Send me a DM. I would love to chat. I'd love to say hi and answer any questions that you have.
I love that. And that does sound super helpful. I'm gonna like go download that guide right now because I think I need that too. Well, thank you again for joining us and just spreading all this beautiful knowledge with our postpartum moms.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
I hope you loved that episode as much as I loved creating it. And if you want to learn more, be sure to download your free VBAC resource guide for even more tips and advice at birthingcometrue.com/VBAC guide. And don't forget to subscribe to the Journey to VBAC so you never miss an episode. Until next time, trust in yourself and remember, you are amazing no matter how your birth unfolds. Bye for now.